My name is Tamsin O'Keefe. For 20 years, my world has been measured in nanometers and angstroms, a scale of existence so small it defies human intuition. It exists in the sterile, yellow-lit clean rooms of Innovate Silicon, Fab 12. The air here tastes of ozone and filtered perfection, a scent I find more comforting than any perfume. The only sound is the foundational hum of billion-dollar machinery and the ghostly whisper of air circulating through HEPA filters, a constant hymn to purity. This is my sanctuary. My art is etched in silicon with light you cannot see, a process more akin to summoning than manufacturing. I am the architect of the gold mask. It is not a physical object, but an intricate tapestry of data, a set of almost impossibly complex exposure and etch recipes for our flagship 3-nanometer process. My algorithms are the soul of this place, the invisible consciousness that guides the machines. They anticipate and correct for vibrations finer than a human heartbeat, for temperature shifts of 1/100th of a degree. I once spent 3 sleepless weeks chasing a yield variance of 0.5%, finally tracing it to the faint seismic signature of the freight trains passing 2 miles away at night. My solution, patent number 9,834,112, is a predictive harmonic cancellation algorithm. Because of that obsession, this fab achieves a 94% yield on its most complex chips, a number our competitors whisper about at conferences. I built this. Not the building, not the machines. I built the crucial invisible thing. I built the perfection. My apartment is the antithesis of the fab. It is a quiet space of warm wood and soft light overlooking the city. Tonight, rain streaks down the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the cityscape into a Monet painting. I don't own a smart speaker or a digital assistant. The only music here comes from a vintage Thorens turntable, spinning a first press of John Coltrane's A Love Supreme. The soft crackle of the needle is a comforting analog imperfection, a welcome contrast to my day. My notes are not typed on a screen. They are written in a leather-bound Leuchtturm journal with a Pelikan M800 fountain pen, a gift from my father when I earned my doctorate. The ink is a deep, resonant emerald green, the flow of it on the page a tactile pleasure. In the corner, under a soft, full-spectrum grow light, sits my other world, a climate-controlled terrarium. Inside live my orchids, Phalaenopsis, Paphiopedilum, rare and temperamental beauties that demand patience. Their environment requires the same sterility, the same intuitive understanding of a complex system as my chips. One of them, a notoriously difficult ghost orchid, I've nicknamed Batch 7, because for a year it refused to bloom. It needs a mystery. Then, one morning, it did. They are my children, the only living things I allow myself to nurture with a tenderness I never show at work. They are my silent reward for a life spent in pursuit of inorganic flawlessness. Then, Blake Harrison arrived, and the silence was broken. He was the founder's son, a 32-year-old princeling with a business degree from a school famous for its parties, and an Instagram feed full of inspirational quotes superimposed over pictures of him on a yacht. He inherited the CEO title like one might inherit a vintage car, immediately wanting to add a gaudy spoiler and a new sound system without ever checking the oil. He wore Lululemon jackets to board meetings and called our extreme ultraviolet lithography process printing the little chippies. The scent of his cloying, expensive cologne would announce his presence long before he appeared, an olfactory assault on the sterile peace of the engineering floor. His reign began with a series of shop floor selfies. Him, in a pristine bunny suit 2 sizes too big, flashing a peace sign in the observation gallery of my clean room. The caption read, #ChipGod, #making the future. He treated my temple of precision like a backdrop for his personal brand. The indignities were small at first, like tiny fractures in a wafer, invisible to the naked eye, but capable of ruining everything. He'd ignore me in meetings, turning to my junior engineers to ask about timelines, a subtle power play to diminish my role. He wanted to synergize our deliverables and pivot to a more agile disruption model. He used these words as a shield, a cloud of verbal chaff to hide the terrifying emptiness of his understanding. What he didn't understand was that our company's entire value was based on complexity that had been mastered, not simplified away. One afternoon, during a yield review, he looked at my meticulously prepared projections and smirked. He asked if I used a crystal ball to get my numbers. The marketing team tittered. I simply stared back at him until the smile faded from his face. I explained, in excruciating detail, the predictive models based on thermal decay and material stress I had personally written and refined over a decade. His eyes glazed over. The insult was clear. My expertise was not science to him. It was mysticism, a dark art to be tolerated, not respected. The breaking point came on a Wednesday, the all-hands town hall. The air in the auditorium was thick with the smell of catered coffee and forced enthusiasm. Blake stood on stage, prowling back and forth in fresh white sneakers that probably cost more than my first car. He was a master of the slick presentation, all stock photos of diverse, smiling teams and bold, meaningless statements. The title on the giant screen behind him read, Optimization 2.0, Moving at the Speed of Culture. He spoke of democratizing innovation, of tearing down bureaucratic walls, of making our processes more accessible. Then he stopped, a showman's pause. He looked out over the crowd and his eyes found me, sitting in the front row. He said, "We can't have the whole process held up by the Priestess of Lithography, waiting for her blessing on every batch." A few chuckles rippled through the sales team. "It's time we empower everyone," he continued, his voice dripping with condescending magnanimity, as if he were freeing an oppressed people. The laughter grew. It washed over me, a wave of hot shame. He had taken my life's work, my art, my brutal, beautiful science, and dismissed it as shamanism for a cheap laugh. In that moment, surrounded by the sound of my colleagues laughing at me, the burning fury in my chest didn't explode. It collapsed inward, cooled, and crystallized into something hard and perfect. It became a plan. He wanted to simplify my system. I would let him, and I would watch it break him. That evening, I didn't go back to my office. I went to the observation gallery, the same one he used for his selfies. I stood in the dark, looking down at the clean room. The machines moved with a silent, robotic grace, bathed in the eerie yellow light. This was my creation, my world. He had no idea what he was really trying to steal. It wasn't just a title or authority. He was trying to erase the artist's signature from the masterpiece. I had built this system with one hidden feature, a feature born not of malice, but of a lesson learned years ago. We had a minor incident, a single batch of wafers for a medical device client that was produced with a slightly out-of-spec chemical solution. It was caught by my final checks, but it taught me a valuable lesson. Human error and pressure to cut corners were inevitable. From that day forward, I embedded a final, absolute failsafe. For our most important clients, the ones in defense and aerospace, a standard of quality known as Class A certification was required. It was a legal and contractual guarantee of perfection. As the architect, every single batch of Class A wafers required my personal cryptographic signature to be certified. It was a private key stored on a hardware token I kept in my desk, rotated every 90 days. A quiet, final check. My personal seal of approval. The board knew it existed only as a line item in a quality assurance protocol. They considered it a technical detail they didn't understand. It was my name. It was my promise. Blake's new democratized process would allow any senior manager to authorize deviations from my gold mask recipes. They could sign off on shortcuts to speed up production. But what he didn't understand was that the physical production of the chip was only half the journey. Without my final cryptographic signature, a Class A wafer was nothing more than a beautifully etched piece of silicon. Legally, it was a coaster. I finally went home. The city lights were a soft blur through the rain-slicked window. I didn't put on a record. The silence was better. I opened the terrarium. The air inside was warm and humid. I took a pair of sterile tweezers and gently removed a single yellowing leaf from my prize Paphiopedilum. The motion was precise, calm, and final. I was pruning a dead part of the system. I then sat at my home computer, not my work laptop, and began running a series of simulations. I plugged in the exact parameters Blake had proposed in his town hall. The models predicted a thermal variance cascade, leading to a yield drop of approximately 18%. I saved the simulation results, time-stamped. It was no longer a matter of if, it was a matter of when. The next few weeks were a quiet montage of corporate absurdity. Blake held ideation sessions and blue sky thinking workshops. He brought in consultants who spoke of disruptive synergy and wore suits without socks. During one particularly painful meeting, he suggested we just teach an AI to do what Tamsin does, but faster. He said it with such confidence, as if he were the first person to ever think of it. He did not grasp that my work was creating the very logic he wanted the AI to learn. It was like suggesting you could teach a photocopier to write a novel. I watched, I waited, and I tended to my orchids. I felt a cold, clean satisfaction growing inside me. It was the same feeling I got when a complex new process finally stabilized, when the data aligned and the yield numbers ticked up to 94%. It was the pleasure of a complex system behaving exactly as designed. Blake had no idea that his every move was leading him deeper into a trap I had built years ago, a trap designed to catch not incompetence, but heresy. The heresy of believing you can have the result without respecting the art. The official email arrived on a Monday morning. It was from Blake. Subject: Go for optimization. It contained his digitally signed authorization to implement the new, simplified process recipes. He was so proud. He thought he was cutting through red tape, unleashing the company's potential. He was a child playing with a box of matches in a munitions factory. I saved a copy of the email to a secure encrypted folder. Then I took my hardware token, the one containing my cryptographic key, and locked it in the bottom drawer of my desk. My part was done. Now I just had to let physics do the rest. The first signs of trouble were subtle, visible only to me. I had access to the raw telemetry from the EUV machines. I saw the minute thermal variations his shortcuts were causing. 100th of a degree here, 100th there. It was nothing anyone else would notice. But I knew what it meant. Heat is the enemy of perfection. The delicate structures on the wafers, mere atoms thick, were being subjected to stresses they weren't designed for. Microfractures, like tiny spiderwebs, were beginning to form. A young engineer, David Chen, one of the few who still made eye contact with me in the hallways, came to my office late one afternoon. He looked worried. He showed me a tablet with anomalous readings. He said, "Tamsin, this doesn't look right. The thermal profile is unstable." I had to look this bright, earnest young man in the eye and lie. "Trust the new process, David." The directive came from the top. It was the only part of the plan that tasted bitter, forcing a good engineer to ignore his instincts. The yield numbers began to slip, just as my simulation predicted. 94% became 90, then 85. Blake called a meeting in the main conference room. He stood before a chart showing the downward trend, his face a mask of confident concern. He blamed legacy equipment. He blamed our raw silicon suppliers. He blamed sunspots. He never once considered that the problem was his own signature on an authorization form. He announced he was bringing in a high-priced consulting firm, a trio of sharp-suited men who knew even less about lithography than he did, to holistically re-engineer our value stream. Then the emails from North Star Defense started, our biggest client. The first was polite, a query from a logistics manager about missing certification documents for their latest multi-million-dollar shipment. The second, a day later, was from a vice president, more stern, noting their production line was halted. The third was from their general counsel. It was not polite. They were officially rejecting the shipment. They were freezing all future orders, and they would be imposing contractual penalties, starting at $1 million a day. Panic ripped through the executive wing. A frantic, high-pitched terror I observed with detached curiosity. Blake was a whirlwind of ineffective motion. He yelled at the head of logistics. He called the legal department. He scheduled emergency meetings that accomplished nothing. I saw him in the hallway, his face pale and slick with sweat. He was hunting for a scapegoat. I watched it all from my office, sipping my black coffee. I had a direct feed from the final certification server. I watched as batch after batch of North Star wafers completed the fabrication process. They moved to the final step. The system requested the architect's cryptographic signature, and time after time the request timed out. The field in the database remained null. The system was working perfectly. It was refusing to lie. It was refusing to put my name on a compromised product. The trap, so patiently set, had finally sprung. The emergency board meeting was convened at 8 p.m. on a Friday. I heard about it secondhand. I wasn't initially invited. I waited. At 8:45, my phone rang. It was Arthur Vance, the chairman. His voice was strained. "Tamsin," he said, "we need you on the 40th floor." "Now." I took my time. I shut down my computer, straightened my desk, and put on my jacket. I walked to the elevator, feeling a profound sense of calm. The doors opened to the executive floor. The thick carpet muffled all sound. The air was stale with fear. Through the glass walls of the boardroom, I could see the grim faces of the men and women who just weeks ago had laughed at me. Blake stood at the head of the long mahogany table, his usual Lululemon jacket replaced by a wrinkled suit that looked borrowed. He was desperately trying to project authority, but his voice cracked as he spoke. I entered without knocking. All heads turned. Blake stopped mid-sentence. Arthur Vance gestured to an empty chair. "Tamsin," he said, his voice heavy, "Blake tells us your original system design is the source of this catastrophe." I ignored the chair. I walked to the head of the table and connected my laptop to the main projector. I didn't carry a weapon. I carried data. The first image that appeared on the 12-foot screen was a wafer defect map from the most recent failed batch. It was a sea of red dots, a plague of microfractures. It was hideous. Gasps rippled through the room. Then I split the screen. On the right side, I projected the email Blake had sent me, the one with his optimization order. I highlighted the specific process changes he had authorized in bright yellow. Then, with a few clicks, I overlaid my simulation data, drawing a direct causal line from his directive to the exact thermal warping that caused the failures. The correlation was absolute. The silence in the room was deafening. The look on his face when he realized it wasn't anger, it was a hollow, crumbling confusion. The look of a man who has just realized the language he's been speaking his entire life is meaningless nonsense. I saw Arthur Vance lean forward, his knuckles white on the table. Another board member took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes as if he could wipe the image away. But I wasn't finished. I closed the images and brought up one final screen. It was a simple system log from the certification server. A clean, neat table. Batch number, timestamp, result, and a final column titled Architect's Cryptographic Signature. The column was empty, blank, null, row after row of failure. I turned to face the board. I let the silence hang for a moment longer. I said, my voice perfectly level and calm, the system was not broken. It did exactly what the CEO ordered it to do. Then, as designed, it refused to certify a compromised product. I paused and looked directly at Blake. I watched his world collapse in real time. The system was protecting the company's reputation from its leader. The aftermath was swift and surgical. Blake didn't even try to fight. He just sat there, deflated, a hollowed-out brand. The next morning, I met with Arthur Vance in his office. He looked like he hadn't slept. He didn't ask what I wanted. He asked what I required. I did not ask for my old job back. I dictated my terms. I would take on the new role of Chief Technology Officer. I would have full, irrevocable authority over all fabrication processes and research and development. I would create and lead a new process integrity department, reporting directly to the board. And I would personally handle the negotiations with North Star Defense. He agreed to everything without hesitation. Blake wasn't fired. A public firing would be messy and bad for the stock price. Instead, his role was refocused on brand synergy and market outreach. He kept the corner office and the CEO title, but his authority was gone. He was a ghost, a mascot in an expensive suit, sent to cut ribbons at trade shows. His power, his ego, had been miniaturized. A week later, I sat at my new desk, in my new office on the 40th floor. The view was even better from here. I typed up my first official memo as CTO. It was a new clean room protocol. It stated that for security and contamination reasons, all non-essential personal electronic devices, including phones, were now banned from the observation galleries. Any exception would require a formal, multi-stage risk assessment and written approval, signed personally by the Chief Technology Officer. I hit send. The memo went out to the entire company. I had taken his stage. I had removed his audience. His reign of the selfie was over. I leaned back in my chair. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet. I thought of my orchids, safe in their perfect environment. I pictured Batch 7, my ghost orchid, its delicate white bloom a testament to patience and understanding. A quiet, perfect triumph. The system was back in balance.